Hi everybody, it's Valerie with Bluebird Mercantile, and I just want to show you today how we could use a plain pot from IKEA and turn it into an embellished, beautiful pot with all different designs that would look lovely in your garden, make a nice Easter gift, but it makes just a one-of-a-kind art piece that you can be proud of that you made, and it's useful. So what you'll need for this is Iron Orchid air dry clay, tight bond, quick and thick glue. I got this at Lowe's. Really good, works very well. It's thicker, so it does hold the molds to the castings to the pot without slipping pretty well. I like to have some craft sticks, wide and small. I have a lucite roller. You can use anything to roll out your clay, but it gives you a chance to get it uniformly rolled out without any lumps or ridges in it. I'm using the Iron Orchid Monarch mold in this today, so we can just put a few flowers on here, and I may add some of the other molds as well. One of the first things you have to do is just decide what you want to put on your mold, what size your pot is, what size it'll go with. So you can see maybe a larger monarch butterfly, a little dragonfly, those things will all go on there. I'm going to start with a base piece of clay to kind of give us a little surface behind on the background to work with. Once you put all of these on, we're going to paint it with a solid color of chalk paint, and then we're going to add a wash after it's dry. It usually takes a few days for it to dry, and you will see some cracking or pulling apart, and I just go back in with pieces of clay and just fill in the spots and then put another coat of paint on. But I do feel like the coat of paint seals it and keeps it from shrinking and cracking better if you do it while it's still damp than if you've let it dry overnight. I have little blocks to hold my pot here. This is a Bright Art pot from IKEA. They come in 3 sizes, small, medium, large. This is the smallest. Make a great set if you want to do a series all together. First, I'm going to use the mold. I'm going to decide what sizes I'm going to put on there. I'll probably put the big butterfly and some small ones on, just trying to gauge the area that I have in the front of the pot so you can see it the best. I'm going to put a piece of clay in here as our base and then go from there. Take your clay and your roller, just roll it out like you would dough. The Iron Orchid air dry clay, I find, is the one I prefer the best over all of them so far. It's lucky that it is that I sell it, but just comparing to the other types of clay, some of them are very cellulosey, pulpy, and they feel kind of squishy. I don't like that to work with. This feels much more like regular porcelain clay than I've felt any of the air dry clays. And I think it gives you the finer details that you get in the porcelain clay a little bit better. So you can see I'm just kind of doing a random shape here. It doesn't have to have, I just want it to be organic, nothing crazy. I want it to be fairly uniform. Sometimes I like the edges to be a little thin so I can kind of curl them up a bit and give a little bit of texture on the pot. So now I'm just going to place it and kind of see how I like the placement of it. I think I'll take a little bit off the bottom here and I'm just going to tear it so I get some organic edges. So now that I've decided where I'm going to put it and how I like it, then I'm going to get my pot set in place. You can use anything. I got these 2 little wood slices and they just kind of hold it in place for me there so that it doesn't roll around and you don't have any problems smushing any of your molds. So now I've just put the tight bond, a blob on there. You really don't need much. I've probably gone a little heavy on that. And I used the craft stick to move it around and make an even layer all the way out to the edges. You want to make sure that you get those all evenly coated so when you put it on the pot, you can press the edges down and get a nice seal and not have too many gaps around it, especially on your base layer. I like to have that fairly attached to the pot with no extra airspace. Another tip, I like to use a craft stick and dip it directly into the bottle of Titebond glue. That way it doesn't make a big mess. I also like to have a plastic Ziploc baggie, because then your stick doesn't actually stick to it and pull up pieces of paper like a paper towel does. So now we just flip that over, put it on, and you're going to get little fingerprints and dents and things like that, and none of that will show. You'll be able to smooth all of it out. Now here's what I was talking about your edges. When you get up to the edges, just press so you make sure there's contact, and I wipe off the edge just so there's not a big gap between that. I hope that's showing on the camera. And I wipe off any excess glue. The glue does get painted over fairly well. It's not really a problem if you leave some on there. So this just gives us a nice base to start with. Now, I'm going to take our mold. And you have to think about what elements you're going to put on, and if there's any of them you want to layer. And with the same technique of masking like we do with stamping, you kind of mask with molding, but you just cut away parts. So if I want to put, let's say, a butterfly on top of a butterfly, I would make sure that I cut apart the part that's underneath off, apply that piece first, and then apply the larger butterfly to where it looks like it's on top, but it's actually kind of butting up against, and you don't have too much excess. You can layer them. It just, you know, it's thicker, it makes it longer to dry, and I think that it takes a little bit of the real pottery look to it away. So I'm going to go for this butterfly in the middle, and I'm just using cornstarch, a tiny bit, you do not need much, on a fan brush. So you just put it in around, especially around the inside edges of a tight spot. I think that helps it release if it's a smaller detail. Like the antennas, for instance, they're a little bit more fragile because they're a smaller surface. So just put this in your mold. And if you can pull some of it away with your thumb, pushing away from you I think does better than pulling towards you. When it lifts out, what you'll see is when you have your cornstarch in there is it makes it really not stick a lot of times in some spaces, so you have to kind of fill back in as it pulls apart. That's usually not a big deal. But you want to make sure all your edges are smooth so you get all the details. Now here's when another craft stick comes in handy. You just take this, kind of hold the edge, pull it across, but make sure all that micro rim edge is cleaned off, and it'll come out easier, and then you'll have a nice smooth edge. So I'm going to turn that over and you start to unmold it. So just bend your mold a bit, gently work to help it come out. And there you go. It's very fragile, this one. Some aren't as fragile as others, but this one seems to be, because of the connection area being so small in between. So I want to be a little more careful with that. And just put your glue on, spread it around so it's all covered. And then place it on your clay. So I'm going to move this back here so you can see a little better. Just like the stamping, kind of once you commit and lay it down. And again, I go in and try to make sure that the edges are down as much as possible. Now you can see here where I go off a thicker spot. That's okay. You just push down and that helps seal it down too. And there you see. Now I really like the edges that are showing around it. I probably won't fill this all up like some of the others that I've done. And you can look at it too, like here I think, oh, you know what? I think I'd like to have some of the stamping from maybe the Kindest Regards stamp on here. Or actually we could do one of the butterflies. Let's see. Let me grab that. Another handy trick, I've got these envelopes that are scrapbook page savers. I believe they're 13 by 13, and they fit great with the stamps. And it keeps them all together, keeps them from getting messy and lost. So I think what I'll do is use this big butterfly stamp, and I'm just going to use it to get that relief pressed into the clay. But you get the feeling that you know it's a butterfly. So you see it gives a little bit of texture of the butterfly. I like that. It's kind of organic. And then get another small piece of clay and try another butterfly. So I think maybe this large dragonfly. That's kind of different. So just put the clay in. You just want to mash it down in there so you get all the air pockets filled in. makes it a little more seamless. I think it makes for a more structure to the molding, the casting that you're making, because there's not a lot of little different pieces of clay seams in there together when you put little tiny bits in. So clean up all the edges. And turn that out. That came out really well. So you can see. Flip it over. Get some of our glue. Again, depending on the casting, what you're doing, just make sure that the edges are covered. And if it's a delicate piece with long, you know, you can tell this has got more stress on those wings because they're longer out from such a small attachment point. Just be careful to support them so they don't crack. But even if they do, you can pretty much pick it all up and put it back together. It's not usually, you know, a total loss. So let me decide where we want to put this extra one. I think right here. And sometimes as you're working with it and it dries, it's going to start shrinking, and it does move. So just the next day when you check on it and it's dry, you'll see sometimes that it's shrunk up and there's a little bit of glue lines. It's not going to hurt anything. Like I said, you can go back in with little bits of clay. Sometimes I'll just take a little piece of clay like this and then tear off little tiny pieces. And you can see, you can really, really flatten that out. It's very, very creamy. So I just use those little pieces and go in and fill in little spots and then smooth them out. So that way it's a seamless, like I said, it creates more of a look of real pottery without having to use a kiln and all of that. So see, I kind of like that with not too much more on there. I might put one more thing up here. Maybe just a little medallion or something right there. Let's see here. I think what I'll do is this is our laurel mold, or I'm sorry, fleur-de-lis mold, because it has fleur-de-lis. And it has the rabbit and the chicken hearts. This is a great one for Valentine's Day and spring. But there's also acorns, so this is really a seasonal, you know, seasonless mold. You can use it all year round. But I think I'll do the small little fleur-de-lis right here, just to have an accent. So again, I'm going to use my brush with a little tiny bit of cornstarch on it. I don't know if fleur-de-lis have different names for the different designs. This one's definitely a little bit smaller, but you know, it's just a decorative look. Gives a little more dimension, texture to your piece. The design element. I'm going to use a craft stick to kind of level that off. these silicone molds are great because you can just bend them. They've got enough weight and heft to them that they don't just fold up on themselves. I've seen some molds that are very thin, and so when you're working with them, you can smush the details because you don't have an edge that's sturdy. These are not that way. Very sturdy, very thick, but yet if you look through, you can see where I'm pushing. So you get the details, but you don't have to worry about it not being sturdy enough to get crisp edges when you go to push them out of the mold and such. So now we have our little fleur-de-lis here. And I like, he's not perfect. He's got a couple little chunks on him. Another thing, when you take them out of the molds and you see there's like a little edge, just run your finger around it. If you want to smooth that out now, you can. Flip it over. Put our glue on it. Your hands do get kind of messy when you're doing this. The glue, between the glue and the clay drying, you kind of get, you feel like the mummy. So, bring this back down so you can see it. I'm just going to put it right there. Just trying to balance out the design. Sometimes I go and I'm like, oh, now I want something over here, and now I want something over there, and now I want something over here. So I have to learn to say when sometimes, but it's always fun. So see here, we've got just a little fleur-de-lis, a dragonfly, a butterfly, and we're gonna paint this whole thing over right now with just, I've got a off-white chalk paint. What I'll do, as you can see, some of the other ones that I did, how it'll just be totally covered and coated in paint. And it's really kind of like almost a glaze look that you would have with your regular ceramics. So now I'm going to take a paintbrush. I don't want it to be too wet. I don't want it to be too dry. So I'm going to dry it off here that's been sitting. But you want to dip the bristles. So I don't mind if it's a little bit wet. The first coat, I like to get in all the nooks and crannies if I can. And then after that, we'll go back in and fancy paint cup here. The plastic Honey Nut Cheerios cereal. Gotta save everything. Every little bit counts. So, just gonna take the paint. Let me see here. And just paint over it. And the paint, of course, unifies the whole project, covers seams, helps seal the clay, helps keep it from cracking. Although I will say, the new Iron Orchid air dry clay, I haven't had near the cracking problems that I've had with other air dry clays with it at all. And I think that it's creamier. I always say that when people ask me, it's a creamier consistency instead of a spongy consistency to some clays out there. And I like that better. It seems to handle, to me, a lot like porcelain clay does. So you can get fine details. You can push it really thin on the edges if you want to, which I think makes a difference. I think when sometimes things are molded and they're too thick, it looks like it's not as professional, or it's more of a child's type product. It doesn't make it look as much as like a fine art type product. And with these, I think they definitely have a much more finished, fine looking edge to them. And mine are fairly rough. I mean, you can do this even more delicately if you'd like. You know, if you take your time, you can smooth them out with a brush a little bit more. Things like that. You can see I'm just getting a coat as much as possible all the way around. You'll need to do another 1 or 2 coats. Like I said, it will shrink up. You'll see a little bit of gap around the edge. And you just fill it in. After this is dried, like tomorrow, I'll thin down my paint just a little bit more so I can get in any little nooks and crannies that might open up. And that seals it, and again, gives it a unified look. I just like to run the paintbrush around the inside because, you know, it kind of covers a little bit of the sins. But here we go. There is a finished look until we put a glaze on. Now what I'll do after these dry, I'll mix probably about 4 parts water to 1 part of a darker color, gray. Maybe I'll do a dark green on some of these because they're much more of a springy floral look. And this paint is a little to the yellow side of cream. I do want to show you one that I didn't paint. And it has, I painted it, but I painted it with a glaze. I just used a glaze, not a full paint. And you can see a lot of cracks and movement away from the glue. Now that can all just be painted right over. I'll go in, I'll show you right here how I was telling you I will, for lack of a better term, I guess, chink. That's what they do with log cabins when they put the grouting or the material between the logs. They call it chinking. So I'm going to chink the flower pot. But see, I'll take a little bit and it'll stick to itself. You don't have to glue it back down. So get the camera here. So we can see where there's a little bit of gap there where it's pulled apart. You can just go in with your finger and mold that into the crack. And you can see it fills in. It doesn't really hurt the detail of what we're trying to do there. It's the little beaded rope mold. Just your finger around it. Rub it in here. So you can just do that around any cracks if you feel like you'd like it to have a little less of a gap there, which I think makes it look smoother. Absolutely. It doesn't distract you with shadows and such on the pot, so it doesn't distract what you're looking at on there. And you can see I just kind of dragging that with my thumb and pushing at the same time. It's like caulking sometimes when you have to put a little bit of caulk, or if you've ever glazed a window, then you know that you kind of have to put that glazing putty into the edge and push it around and clean off the seam. It's kind of the same idea. And then you just brush it smooth so you don't have any lumps of clay. And I'll continue to do this, you know, all the way around this pot. But I believe if I had done a real actual chalk type paint instead of just a glaze, which this was actually a pre-made glaze, that I find they're kind of sticky. I think what happens with it is it doesn't help seal out the air as much as the full paint does, so the clay dried faster and it cracked more because it was drying faster and shrinking up from the moisture loss of drying. So you just fill in those little gaps, and then I'll go back over and paint this whole thing back. And it makes it look a little more uniform all the way across. So like right down here, you can see we'll just take a little bit of clay, just kind of rub it and pull it. And that's filling in the spaces and smoothing out the transition between the two. So I will make a video when we get done and get the all of them dried and put our glaze on, so you can see what they all look like finished then. All right, well, thanks so much, and I hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully I'll be making a lot more. Take care. Bye-bye.